There are many people in Pakistan who are great champions of a uniform curriculum at the school level for everybody. The current administration is one of that, and textbooks are being written which are meant for this thing and published, and that is obviously invoking some controversy as there seems to be a shift in many affairs. Now, as far as a uniform Islamiyat is concerned, or a uniform English is concerned, that was followed mostly quite early on. For example, the Islamiyat taught in the schools of Pakistan is often a combination of Sufism and some degree of Shia ideas and some degree of the Sunni ideas and other things, influences. And basically for the unity of the country and unity of the followers of the faith. Although this particular aspect is also now inviting some controversy as people claim that certain passages and certain emphasis which was on the jihad, or certain emphasis on certain other aspects of the exclusivity of Islam and its distinction from some of the other faiths, and its superiority toward in terms of other followers of other faiths is not being sufficiently emphasized. This controversy is going on. Some textbooks have invoked controversy, but this is not the subject of this talk of mine. The essential thing is that in Pakistan there are, practically speaking, two different lines which have been followed over the years. One is the Urdu medium and other is the English medium. And the third one is the sideline, the madrasa culture, and a very few schools which follow certain others, especially American guidelines and American system. And there is one other, I think, international system which has got a few prominent schools. Overall, there are two types of schools. The Urdu medium schools, which are affiliated with the government of Pakistan, and the English medium schools, which share most of the syllabus of what is prescribed by the government of Pakistan, but some of it is not that, and especially those which offer O-level, A-level, or Cambridge, or one of the variants of the British examinations, have mostly their own textbooks in O-level, A-level, and so on. Now, that brings us to not directly towards this controversy, but first have a look at what used to be the system of the Urdu medium, the English medium, the madrasa, and some of the other examinations which were available. And I would like to go to a little bit detail concerning these, because without understanding what is at present and what had changed in the last few years and what lies ahead, one cannot understand this controversy of the syllabi. What used to happen in Urdu medium school was there used to be a kachi, pakki, and then there was this primary schools, and then there was the middle, that is 8th grade, and there was a metric, and there was an FA, and then there was a BA and an MA. Some institution offered MPhil. PhD was offered in very few institutions, and generally speaking, by the late 1960s, a teacher was supposed to be a BA and as well as B.Ed, Bachelor in Education, and this was the kind of situation. On the rural side, there were numerous girls especially, even boys, who would um, study only till fifth class, and some of them would drop out because the teacher was beating them, some only up to third class, some would never go to the school. A girl in rural setting who has done a middle, that is eighth class, is thought to be very educated and worth marrying. Uh, um, had been thought to be at a marriageable age of maybe at 14 or something like that, and marriages used to occur at that time. Marriage of infants is so common that even Mr. Gandhiji, I think he was married in his very childhood and so on. So that was also an impediment, early marriage to education and so on. By the late 70s, now people, especially girls, they were usually doing master's degree if they could, if they were living near a college, and so on. And then over the next 30 years, there was this tendency of women working and women getting a degree, and women going into engineering, women going into medicine in large numbers, and so on. So that was the basic thing, which was one of the problems in early situation was that the the English language was taught from sixth class onwards, and the funny thing was that on one hand there were English medium schools from which students were taught uh, English from first class, and the books used to be step by step and radiant reading and so on. And by the time they were in sixth, seventh class, they could write English, they could write, speak, they could understand quite a little bit. Although it was not up to that level as that the books demanded, but still it was good level. And now when they rose up to metric, which was the 10th class, which was the high school, what used to happen was that in 8th and in 9th and 10th, the textbooks were uniform, and that was very funny because the boys who had, for example, done English medium and read all these books which were used in probably at one time in the British schools as well, and they were published there. And they would find very simple type of English in matriculation, and it was as if uh, they are studying in class 6 or 7 of the English language. Although the standard of Urdu was quite high in matriculation, and basically uniform. What I'm saying is that uniform syllabus for the English language in the 9th and 10th class was really a nonsense for the English medium, because that basically meant that they will not be learning anything new in 9th and 10th class, and it was essentially a cessation of the English from that. Later on, and one of the English was such a big problem that in teaching of English that there was a time in late 60s, 70s, especially in rural areas, if you ask any boy that what have you done, he would say, no, I did FA, I did BA, I sat in the BA exam and I had supply in English plus something like that, meaning failing in English. Same was in FA, same was in matric, same was in lower situation. Let me tell you an interesting thing. I had to travel to Southeast Asia in, I think that was mid-90s, and the plane was supposed to take off from Lahore, and it was supposed to go to Southeast Asia. What was the funny thing in the plane is that it was full of young people wearing very funny type of dresses and neckties and things like that, and they were basically celebrating the exam. Some of them had not passed the exam, most of them had got supplementary, they had not cleared exams, some had failed, and they are trying to remove their depression, and they came from slightly well-off business families, and they were going to Thailand for reasons which you can understand. it was a desperate situation as regards education. However, with the passage of time, as finances became available, degree colleges were opened at small places, girls' schools were opened at small places and towns, and it became possible for girls in the rural or small towns to at least reach the level of a BA, and in slightly larger towns to the master's degree, and the same for men and so on. Education had always a very strange tilt. Basically, in the 60s, everybody would try CSS, that means the Spirit Services examination. He would also try ISSB, the military, and he would try the FSC for engineering or medical college. If he can't find anything, he will probably go for a BA, BSc, and enter education or some other thing, or even quit or do business or whatever. Very limited choices, very limited choice of profession. However, I would say, because the state institutions were heavily subsidized, to obtain education, provided the college is at the same place as you live, it was not difficult for for a poorer family. But even at that rate, many families could not afford beyond 5th class, 10th class, or 12th class, or up to BA. Even then, in spite of that, because of the overhead expenses and traveling expenses and so on. So this was the situation, and some part of this situation continued. I am not talking too much about madrasas, because madrasas were always on a sideline. They were a kind of a combination of a opportunity for getting funds from various charities and so on, and also what is called in Quran the good tasks, for which charity is allowable, and they would provide funds for the teachers who are teaching and so on, and they had their own way of doing things. However, and generally they were poor. However, when the Afghan jihad started against the Soviet Union, and also to some extent in the Kashmir issues and so on, there was a need for the determined and stormtroopers and that type of thing, which are not part of the state establishment or whatever in many countries, and that basically saw the expansion of the institution of madrasa even more, as young people were needed. But overall, the supply of madrasa students has regularly been more than mosques which can be constructed and so on. And many of these guys, they usually ended as salesmen in shops and some other professions. Some of them progressed to BA, BSc, and things like something similar to that, became Islamiyat teachers or something like that. And generally, as salesman or something, or worker, they used to be a bit more honest than some of the Western education system people, more obedient and more honest and more desirable for recruitment. However, with passage of time, everything changes, and now the current situation is that in any rich mahalla or place, the strange situation is that most of the servants' children, they go to the government schools, and most of the house owners' children, they go to the schools which teach O-level, A-level, and so on, like that. There has become a very serious class distinction. If you go to, let's say, one of the government colleges or something, you are not likely to see that the parents of children, waiting outside or riding on some Land Cruiser or anything. The best you can see is maybe a good Honda or some Civic or something, or usually FX or one of these Suzuki low range, and so there's a clearly perceptible difference in the class which goes to that. Now, that cannot result with the curriculum or something, that cannot result in the fusion. Now I will come to the OA level setups or the Cambridge examination setups or the English medium setups, and would point out that exactly what is wrong with them and why this issue of it's not just a matter of patriotism or uniformity in the curriculum or something. There is something else also, which is basically some degree of difficulty and rot in the schools, especially who are teaching the OA levels and that type of curriculum. And this would be the next subject of my discourse, and we will go to it in some depth because of the importance of this thing. In this respect, one has to make a distinction between the things related to OA levels, Cambridge exams, and overseas exams, and those related to the private institutions themselves, which are obviously controlled from here. Now, the basic problem with these private institutions is that, number one, apart from the high fees, obviously they are not funded by the state. Rather, the state has got this funny policy of taxing or intending to tax those parents whose children study in such schools. I mean, this is absolutely ridiculous. And then obviously, unlike the general institutions where all the salaries are government institutions, where all the salaries are paid by the state and all types of fund, these people have to afford themselves, and by this way or that way. And with this comes the problem that subject specialists cannot be afforded by all the schools, and most of the schools, they share their teacher with other private schools, and it's quite common that there are certain teachers in senior classes of these schools who just come for 3-4 times a week, and they give lectures and then they disappear to somewhere else, and only to reappear again. The end result of that is that, unlike fixed full-time teachers, these students, these teachers don't really know their students that well. They have not been, you might say, raised themselves along with the classes, and that has some import. That does affect the standards. But overall, generally speaking, from the kindergarten to about class 7 or 8, the standards of these private schools is generally good, and they have got a very elaborate system of recording the performance of each student, and they have this system of giving very detailed things. However, there's one problem here. There are too many tests being done, and that puts quite a bit of pressure on the parents, because they have to prepare their children. In fact, they have to do the tests also along with their child, and this type of thing, is not very nice. I mean, most of the task of learning should be done at school and not at home. Then there is another problem, that most of these schools, even quite rich schools, even schools which have got, let's say, 1,500-1,600 students in one campus, they don't have any child medical service of any type, or assessment, or psychological issues which now crop up with this age, hardly any have got any worth it medical setup, and which is a great omission. Sometimes the children fight, they might get injured, or there might be some spontaneous injury falling from the stairs or something, and there's not much medical thing going on there. There's no, I mean, even these big schools with 1,600 students, none of them paying less than 15,000-20,000 a month, and they don't like to even afford a medical doctor or a nurse, and that's another thing. After about 7th class comes the problem. Most of these are enrolled in some kind of overseas examinations like O levels, A levels, and things seems to start from about class 9, 10, 8, and that type of thing. And the issue here is that now these children, they are getting maturer, and usually the O-level results are not that bad of the private institutions. The problem comes in after that. It is very unfortunate that some of these private institutions do not make a distinction that, I mean, it's not a good practice to have an under 5th graders in the same place as the under 10 grade, 5 to 10, and then, you know, there are sometimes, here are these small children also playing around, and then there are certain older people doing their bachelor's like degrees in some of these schools, which have overnight become so-called almost universities. This is really, I think, something which the Higher Education Commission must be put to the spot, actually. And what has happened in the last 20 years is that, for example, there was a building on Murray Road, which is a main road between Pindi and Islamabad. And that at one time, that small building, which was about 3-4 storied, housed 3 different universities. This is really ridiculous that universities, private universities, were being recognized, which have no campuses as such. They have got no grounds, they have got no tuck shops, they have got no system. They don't look like institutions. Even now, there are many universities, so-called universities, which are on the 3rd floor, many law colleges residing on the 3rd floor of some building, and this is really ridiculous. I think the state should come to the rescue of even the private enterprise. After all, the people who use these institutions, the students, it's their parents who are giving the taxes and everything. And they also deserve to have a pie in these type of things. And such institutions should not be allowed. The other day somebody was saying that if a university is housed in a floor of a building, then maybe its affiliated medical college would be in a bathroom. I mean, this is really a very ridiculous thing. But the main problem which occurs is not at the O level. At the O level, they have got subjects which are compulsory, and a reasonable amount of Pakistan studies and Islamiyat and certain local things and Urdu and something they are taught, although the standard of Urdu is not good in O level. I think at this standard of Urdu, I mean, I would not like to pass anybody high school in a country whose national language is Urdu. I think that also needs to be looked at. And one of the problems with O levels is the same as the problem with A levels, is that there doesn't appear to be one recommended textbook, which is very bad. and the examinations are also based, their preparation is based on old exam papers and their answers available on the internet and so on, and they don't seem to follow any particular textbook. Now, the standard wisdom in UK these days is that these exams are designed to distinguish between a good candidate from a bad candidate. In fact, this type of approach is used at all levels, in postgraduate levels and that type of levels in exam sitting. But we beg to disagree. We are developing countries, and we are more interested not in distinguishing between the good candidate or a bad candidate. We are interested in that the textbook which we prescribed and the questions therein, which one of them has understood them and which one of them has memorized it and which one of them has understood it. We are more interested in teaching the subject. We are not interested in just the banks of questions out of which something would come. Obviously, that covers a lot of course, I would not deny that. But that's not very nice. That's not fitting into the structure of science itself. We have to stimulate the structure of science and other various arts by the help of very well written, well illustrated textbooks. We are not there to promote certain publishers of the United Kingdom or anybody from anywhere specifically. We are more interested in having syllabi which are predictable, and we can grade the performance of a candidate correctly. And then there is another funny thing in both in O levels and especially in A levels and senior Cambridge and higher Cambridge and equivalent exams, is that the questions are somewhat set. Sometimes what would happen is that in A level physics we'll come to learn that, well, in such and such paper, somebody who got a score of 25 will get a passing grade, but in chemistry it would be 35, but in that paper it would be 40, and there is some type of grading and so on. And after all this, they give A, B, C, D, E, and after that, there is another institution which has developed as a result of this weakness in the exam setting, that there is a inter board which would assign and translate those numbers into Pakistani, that what it is equivalent to and so on in terms of our grades, and that generally does not help, because what we have seen is that these private schools which are offering A levels, they may do better in the arts subjects. They are not doing better in the science subjects. Their candidates, their students are not making it into the medical colleges in the number they should. And it is because of a very jumble mumble type of science education going on in these private institutions. One other aspect which I was a bit surprised, that during that time when we people did our FSCs and A levels and so on, the standard of A level, for example, in certain subjects, science subjects, was more than the standard of FSC at that time. I'm talking about 2, 3, 4 decades back. There was more syllabus covered in that, and and that type of thing. And when I saw it recently, I felt that the syllabus, the amount of syllabus of the A level is somewhat less than the syllabus of FSC in terms of physics, in terms of these types of things. Although chemistry was always more in A levels than in FSC, that was always there, but the biology is less and the physics is less, than FSC, which basically again translates into that because there are no proper textbooks for A level, except that there's a plenty of them, and some of them, the other day I was looking at some EdXL thing, and they've got many separate papers and so on, and they and the books, each book was about 4,000-5,000 rupees, and for each subject there were 4 or 5, for paper there were 4 or 5 books, and although they were very detailed books, they were very nicely written books, but they really were far beyond the requirements of an A-level student. I mean, these are not really textbooks. So that's another aspect. And the third aspect, and which is very objectionable about O and A levels and GSC exams and many overseas exams, even the exams such as MRCP exams and exams which are conducted I think by the GMC exams and other exams conducted by the British Council. One thing which is absolutely not acceptable is that the grades obtained in a certain exams are not regarded as perpetual, meaning that if you pass a paper, there will be some rule that no, after if you don't do it with this thing or that thing, you will have to do it again, and even if you pass all the combination and then you don't progress to that stage within 1 year, 2 year, then you have to do everything again. This is not acceptable. I think the Supreme Court of Pakistan should put its heavy hand and stop all educational institutions, whether they belong within the country or outside the country. Anybody who will not accept the result perpetually, whether of a paper or of a component of an exam or of the total exam itself, and ask them to repeat that in 2 years, 3 years or whatever, if they don't proceed to the next stage, I think these should be banned in Pakistan. This is wrong. One good thing about OA levels is that they do give you the facility of, they will even send you your marked paper, but you have to pay quite a bit of amount. Regarding the appeals procedure, I think that's a phony type of procedure, and the people who have asked for the papers to be seen, they are sometimes struck by the fact that if superficially the papers appear to be marked by machines, not by human beings, and these are not all MCQ papers, and sometimes the markings are not correct, and maybe there's a definition given by somebody carrying, let's say, 4 marks, and they will give only 1 mark even with the correct definition, and there is a big right mark which is not exactly opposite the question. It is somewhere down the paper, as if there was some churning out of the printing and there was some artificial intelligence, and the right mark is put somewhere else and so on. It's not impressive. Even the conditions for the review or appeals is very restricted, and that also entails, I think, some fees and so on. So overall, the exam system, apart from the fact that the exams are conducted in generally good centers, the papers are generally on good paper, unlike the FSCs and so on, which is not sometimes that good, and generally the security is better. But overall, apart from the procedure of conducting the exam and nice papers printed on nice pages and pictures and so on, the checking system is very much suspect, and the appeal system is basically not really up to the legal standards of Pakistan, and unfortunately the perpetual credits of what you pass is not accepted. Somebody has done AS and he will be asked to repeat. Well, you have not done it in this time, repeat it again. Why not? If a person has passed something, he has passed something. You cannot deny this legal fact. And I think the Supreme Court of Pakistan should take strict action from retrospective effect as well. where the where the British or American or whatever international boards operating in Pakistan, and also the Pakistani boards, because it has become a practice among educational institutions that they just want more money, 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 money. And they just want the candidates to reappear again and again and again and again under various pretexts and that type of thing. And this has to be stopped with an iron hand. Regarding the performance of the idea of unified education system, there is a very strong argument against it also. Pakistan has got about 7, 8, 9 million people outside, and we all know that when somebody is visiting some Middle Eastern country or something, and especially Western countries, people tend to settle there, or they partially settle there, or they settle for a few years, they come back, they settle again. Whatever they do, it has got effect on the children. The children obviously would like an education in which is flexible, which is accepted outside the country, so that if they want to move, they want to study further in some other country, they can do that. Putting a singular type of system would not help this objective for the greater lot of the people. So this is not really a starter. We do like to have foreign boards operating in Pakistan within the premises of what is lawful. I am not saying that British Council exams should be banned in Pakistan. I think we do need them, but we are not prepared to accept this under the current rules and regulations. And one other thing one feels is that considering that there are so many candidates and there's so many exams which are conducted, one feels sometimes that the people who are conducting these exams locally are generally at a much junior level than generally the kind of people who conduct local exams under the local circumstances, which is also a important thing. Regarding the whole setup of the educational system, it is not so much important that we should have unified curriculum in the schools or something. What is more important is the standard of teaching. What is more important is that the children, they have got access to certain types of services. For example, the nutritional services, the health services, the career counseling services. I must say that the current administrations and the previous administrations likewise really have not really struck any gold in terms of educational reforms. And most of the changes which have occurred over the year are haphazard. The semester system in Pakistan, instead of the 2-yearly exam term system, the semester system was actually introduced during the Bhutto regime and Mr. Abdul Hafiz Pirzada was then the education minister of Pakistan. And probably one of the reasons was that since Bhutto Sahib used the students to unseat Ayub and so on, he might have felt that the 2-year system gives a lot of time to students to loiter around, and this system which would have periodic tests or something would keep them busy and reduce the writing and politicizing of the campuses, which was not a very incorrect observation, although this did not achieve that purpose. What did achieve the purpose of reducing politics in the institution was the banning of the unions during the time of General Zia-ul Haq, and which were a source of great representation of students, but as well as the violence and the culture of hatred on the campuses. But what really struck down the thing was that with the passage of time, the private sector grew quite up, and they had a lot of fees, and the candidates, they were so hard pressed to pay those fees, and they really didn't have time to waste on the boycotts and things like that. So with that, the private system came down the edifice of some of the political wings of the major parties, and I think one of the most affected was the Jamaat Islami, Jamiat-ul-Tulaba and People's Party, the various wings, and Muslim leagues, rising wings, and so on. And campus politics was a bit less after that time, which was rather good. The high fees in private institutions impose an intolerable burden. There are reports that many female students, in order to pay the fee, and they're coming from not very strong background financially, even opt for keeping sugar daddies and these types of people, and even there are reports of engaging in prostitution and so on. This is absolutely very heartbreaking. That education, instead of enlightenment, should lead to a life of selling one's body, and this is a kind of thing which is there. This was there in the Western educational institutions. We sometimes used to hear that, but we are now hearing this type of thing even here, and this is very sad. One of the problems is that some of these high-end private institutions have developed other rules. For example, on the campuses where these A-levels and further such types of private institutions exist, they have become an instrument of the Western culture. And it is sometimes said that these days, if you are not from a very good background, just put your girl or somebody in one of these institutions and let him find a better, financially well-off peer, and maybe his life is made up. I mean, these types of financial thinking is again condemnatory type of thinking. But who has made such things? And most of these private institutions, they will be just celebrating, well, the coming Halloween and coming this thing and that thing, and a very shameless type of culture, which is not sanctioned by either Islam or by Christianity or Judaism or any of the conservative cultures. And increasingly the many of the people of the lower classes regard these schools as just some kind of morally depraved type of institutions. And lately, for the last 10-12 years, there's been a huge influx of drug addiction. There are drug rackets, there are chowkidars, there are other people who are deeply involved in spreading of these narcotics. And the security staff is not trained. There is no website on which we can find out that who are the criminals who might get recruited in the schools. And there are pimps, women who are posing as caretakers of hostels and so on. And all this is absolutely a very ridiculous type of situation. So I think the current administration would be much better off if, instead of just running after the class 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 syllabus and trying to uniform it or something, the various social classes of Pakistan are a reality. Although this is one country, but there are many ethnic groups. For example, there is a huge difference in the culture between people of Punjab and the KPK. There is a slight difference between the culture, not that much, between the people of Punjab and Sindh. Then there is a Baloch culture, and then there is also subcultures, sometimes the cultures among the so-called the sects, Sunni lot and Shia lot can be somewhat different. And then there is culture according to the social class of the people. the people who live in the villages have got a different culture and different values. The culture of inner cities is different. The outer cities is different. The traditionalist is different. The culture of civil servants is different. The culture of businessman is different. And sometimes the differences are quite big. These are not small differences. So in a society like that, trying to impose some kind of thing in terms of education is not good. And secondly, it is often said that the Pakistan education system revolves around about 10,000 publications, books, textbooks, references, and so on in entirety, which is much smaller than the amount of material which is now available. It is quite possible to base a, a education system on, let's say, 200,000, 300,000 books and thousands and millions of journals and so on. Obviously, because the knowledge is very expanding, it also increases the need for having textbooks also, so that some kind of uniformity can be achieved. There are people who feel that some of these calls for uniform syllabus don't arise out of patriotism or nationalism. It basically is an instrument of civil servants of various descriptions to impose their will and to just travel around and, to browbeat the private sector and so on, of which they are in great habit, because after all, the taxpayers are the students' parents and the schools, and not the civil servants who are just the takers. So with this, I think I have gone through this whole issue of the unified education system and the deep cultural diversions which exist, but which also provide a diversity, and it is a necessary diversity, because the career objectives of people, let's say overseas Pakistanis or intend to become overseas, and people from various subcultures within Pakistan, their career objectives are different, their curriculum have to be different. Choice is a great thing in life, and choice and freedom is a great thing. And one of the reasons that people have rejected communism in the world and various forms of fanaticism and fascism in the world is because of lack of choice. And the emperors and the kings who are still remembered as enlightened, so-called, are the ones who like the Abbasids or the some occasional Ottoman or some Spanish Muslim empires and so on, is because of the learning and of the choice and of the width. It is said that the Malian king, very famous Musa, who at his time had probably the largest gold reserves in the world, spent a hell of money trying to bring in scholars from the Muslim world when he was on pilgrimage from West Africa to Mecca. And the Abbasids also had this house of knowledge and things like that, and the cultures which tried to increase their knowledge is the one which flourished for a time and were a source of enlightenment for others. Not the cultures which limit the thing. Somebody would say that goes in argument against textbooks, but the reason is that we are in a state of development in which at least we should have very well illustrated textbooks which explain the subject very nicely. They should be on good paper, they should have good binding, they should not be easily destroyed, and the content should be updated. Instead of just throwing the students into the bazaars and they are copying here from this bank and that bank and so on. And it is unfortunate that the American system of education which was one of the first ones to introduce the various MCQ type formats in the exams, which is so common now, have degenerated into a system in which, there are 5,000, 10,000 MCQs, and that's all you learn, and that is what the exam is based on, and that type of thing. And the negative aspect of this is that there is always a unifying, systematic thinking in a subject, chapter by chapter, fold by fold. You can learn a subject by this thing. I obviously use a lot of MCQ banks and so on. But the thing is that there's a danger that a person may know a subject and not yet understand a subject in its depth, particularly its evolution, its beginning, its direction, if we do like that. So, like other things of the present administration in Pakistan, which have not clicked that well, and also the previous administrations, the education was always a neglected sector, so was the health as a neglected sector, so was the technology transfer as a neglected sector throughout. So I think I should end this, and I have made myself very clear that we tend to oppose restrictions on in trying to make just unified textbooks of different purposes together, which is not really possible actually. We have got the various urban, rural cultures, their different requirements. At one time, in the schools they used to teach, in some of the rural areas they used to teach, I don't know what they're doing these days, they used to teach Zaraat, which is agriculture, which was quite appropriate in those cities and where these were agriculture cities. Then obviously, if there is a need to develop one additional uniform book, and that is the book of how to deal with life itself. Here we have got in our country, people might be a PhD, he might be a doctor, engineer, but he has never been taught by any book that what should he do if there's police standing outside waiting for your arrest, or you have received, somebody has slapped you on the face unnecessarily, or somebody has insulted you, or you are in trouble, or somebody has died, or somebody has done this, what to do next? This type of education is not there. If there has to be any unified thing, it has to be the unified code of conduct or behavior of the people, which can be of some use. Not that we should just say that no, don't read radiant reading or step by step, go for some Punjab textbook board or something, some professor XYZ or something, or I think this is too much. Unfortunately, we don't have people with proven very international type of credentials, not too many of them, and many of them are occupying educational slots which are, and the people and the importance which they have is not reflected by their background or something like that. But overall education has improved. When we were young people, believe me, out of 10 people in Pakistani cities, only 3 or 2 could really write their name or read or something like that. It's much better now. People are very aware. I think at least about 50% of the people can know how to read and write, and I think another 15-20% people have just learned ABC for this and Alab Bete, the Urdu alphabets for messaging others. So things are quite okay otherwise from the literacy point of view, but they are not good from the technology point of view. With this, I think I beg leave, and I would say that very, very much thanks for listening to such long disjointed discourse. But I hope that I raised certain issues which deserve some response. Thank you very much.